Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. So I am joined by Tim Engelhardt, who started releasing music at the tender age of 14 and has gone on to consistently release on some of the most respected labels in the industry and then play his music worldwide through his live performances. Tim, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to the show. We've got so much to talk about. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Pleasure.
So I said sort of then, because I think it is a fantastic thing, releasing a record at the age of 14 and building from them. And you're still a very young man, and I definitely get to say that to you, that's for sure. What really sort of got you started so young in electronic music? Who were your influences? What inspired you to join this game?
Yeah, what really inspired me and triggered me to do this was when I was learning piano. I got a electric piano keyboard with a bunch of like standard preset type of sounds, and then I for the first time had this opportunity to sequence something and basically play something and then have a drum beat accompanying me, and then I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Imagine if I had 8 tracks of that, and then I started looking how to do this, like what's the medium I can do that on, and I found Ableton pretty quickly. So yeah, I think the first thing that really influenced me to do this was the electric keyboard and just having this possibility of layering things and playing overdubs and stuff. I think this was really eye-opening, even though it's trivial, right? But at the same time, if you do this for the first time, it's something that I didn't expect to be able to do.
So is that how you were writing your music, and perhaps how you write it now? Because I know obviously you come from a very musical background, is very much improvising over the top of different layers. Is that your approach? And was that your approach back then? Perhaps let's stay in that time period to start
Yeah,
with.
yeah. Actually, back then, that's what I was doing. I was really trying to write songs, writing chords, then kind of adding a drum, then playing a melody over it. And it's still kind of the way that I work. Jamming is really an essential part of my process, and I think there's a great opportunity in this, like just catching moments that you wouldn't be able to capture, or like play things that you wouldn't play usually if you're not jamming, because you're in this kind of free flowing state, right? And so I definitely embrace that in my production.
And back then, sort of when you were 14 and you were just starting out and you got your release, how did you learn about music production? Because particularly, Ableton Live is a wonderful piece of software, I think, because on the surface it's so accessible. You can start writing music with it almost immediately, but as you'll know, from a modular perspective and what's possible with it, it can also be one of the probably deepest pieces of software I've ever encountered. So how did you learn about it? Was it trial and error? Were you taking courses? What got your skills up in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of trial and error, like 90%, if I'm honest. I was trying to understand Ableton at first for the first, I think like 4 months. I didn't have a clue what I was doing, to be honest. I was really just checking every single device. What could I do with it? And then some of them I found to be not working, or just I didn't know how to use them. And then after a few months it got clear, okay, I can do this with a compressor, and I didn't realize before, right? So I was really doing this autodidactically. And then at some point I met people who told me about the more technical things, like how do you EQ a snare drum, how do you make things glue in a mix, and all these more technical terms. I was introduced to that a lot later, like 2 years probably. Took me 2 years of really just learning by myself to get to that point where I was also comfortable to reach out to people to kind of help me in my journey.
And how many hours a day were you kind of working at it across these? Because I'm getting the impression that you love this so much that you want to be in the studio tons, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think yeah, at the beginning it must have been 4 to 6 hours a day. I spent a lot of time really just wondering how to use certain tools in Ableton, trying to understand everything, and that took me quite a while because I was not used to producing anything. I was really just someone who played the piano at that time and was trying to figure out production. So yeah, I spent a lot of time that I maybe should have spent on school homework instead. I spent that on Ableton,
Well,
which paid
lucky
off
for
in the
us,
end.
you
But
didn't.
yeah, yeah, I still did my school homework though.
And when you were learning the like the tools, was that in context? So you're writing a piece of music and then you're like, well, what does this thing do? Or were you separating your time so there was a part writing and then there was a part trying to learn the software?
I don't think I ever did that distinction, especially in the beginning. Nowadays, I do. Um, but yeah, back then it was really, I was kind of making a track as an exercise every day. I still have those. They're terrible, but every day I was kind of exploring a new device. Let's say I think I did a whole EP with just centering around the Ableton's filter delay at first when I first discovered it because it's so, yeah, you can do so many things with it. You can turn it into, I don't know, like even an instrument if you want. So yeah, I definitely had this kind of approach where I would just experiment with different devices and try to make a track a day.
I love this. Can you sort of flesh that out a little bit more? Because I think this is a really interesting way to learn. What would the process be like? So you'd sit down and you say, okay, the exercise I'm going to do is to write a piece of music and I'm going to center at least part of the concept of that around learning the filter delay. Would you put one on every track, or how would you try to maximize that learning whilst you were writing?
Mm, yeah, I mean, this was a long time ago, but I feel like I concentrated on a few devices. So the filter delay, I just open it up at some point and I realized what you can do with it. And then I really decided to make this kind of a standard tool in my production and make it something that I know really well. And so yeah, for the filter delay, it was really like a dedicated thing. I should do more tracks with this and kind of explore all of the possibilities. So not only using it as a standard delay, but also kind of touching on the ways you can use it where it's not really intended to be, right? You could set the delays to super small and basically make it like a sort of like a synth, right? You could do that if you just have a click sample that triggers it, and then you know. So there's all kinds of ways to use it, and I figured that out during this process of writing that EP or just trying to make it work in my music. And I did this for a few other devices as well, like the erosion and the saturator, especially the saturator. I spent a lot of time on the different modes and the different colorations it can get you. So yeah, I think that was a great learning process, and I still sometimes revert back to this and actually kind of pick out one plugin and just try to discover it while doing tracks or
Yeah,
while
I
doing
love
a
this.
specific project.
And it's interesting as well because I think there's a tendency for a lot of people to almost discount the stock plugins or devices, not just in Ableton but in Logic or Cubase. And I obviously teach and work with Ableton, so it's the one that I know in the most detail. But the power that just comes with what's included before you even look at Max for Live and all the other things is mind blowing. Like you said, you can use them as it is. Just an exploration of the presets can be quite mind-blowing sometimes. And then, as you said, what happens if I kind of try and break this? I try and do stuff with it that it isn't intended. The sound palette and the processing possibilities are incredible. And then we go into racks and all the other amazing things that
Yeah.
that you can do. You mentioned that you were kind of self-learning for a couple of years and then you started asking other people. And I know that, Robert Babich was someone that was a kind of idol to you and very
Mm.
technical guy, great mastering engineer and producer as well. How did that connection come about? What was his part in your journey?
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting. I really just never had any connection to music people in my life before, so I was really just this kid trying to make music, and I was not even trying to, yeah, I don't know, make it with my music at the time. I was really just trying, and so one day I discovered SoundCloud as well. I didn't know SoundCloud, right? And so then at some point I found this guy Robert Babich, and I saw he had a lot of followers, and I liked his music a lot. And then I was like, maybe I should just go ahead and send him some music, not expecting him to reply at all, of course. But yeah, he did reply within I think 2 days or so, and yeah, just gave me really valuable feedback, a lot of great advice, things that I didn't know at the time because I was not in this kind of club context. So he really, yeah, showed me the way on how to write music dedicated for a club because I wasn't doing that at the time. So yeah, I think he opened my eyes in that aspect a bit, and then we kept talking via SoundCloud for a lot of time, and then eventually met up in real life, played a few gigs together. Um, so yeah, I think he's a very important reason why music fascinates me so much and why production fascinates me so much. Um, because he also was the person that introduced me to hardware. I was never using any kind of hardware in my studio. I was just trying to make it work on a computer. And then I came into a studio with like 100+ devices, and I'm like, wow, what do you need this for? Like, tell me, what's the reason to have all these things here? And so yeah, it got me really hooked on this other dimension of production, I would say.
And I imagine that appeals to you a lot as well because of your sort of hands-on approach and jamming, actually having the hardware and all of the different controls available to you helps you creatively a great deal. Would that be right?
I think so. Even though I do feel the same inspiration when I work with software that I control from a good MIDI keyboard, if I have everything mapped, and it's still kind of this jamming thing to me. I don't necessarily need a dedicated hardware synth, but obviously it definitely adds to the experience. But it's also a different skill, right? You have to know when to move the decay, and you have to know when to open the release, right? So it's a different exercise, but I do think that's it adds something to every production.
Uh-huh. So talking about your other influences and things, as well as the kind of tools and the software and using those to as an input, I guess, creatively when you're writing a piece of music. I read that you're not easily influenced by other artists. Do you pick up things from other people? Have you ever deconstructed music to learn from it? Perhaps that would be a good question whilst we're still in the early stage of learning. Have you ever sort of analyzed things, not to copy them, but in order to pick up skills?
Yeah, kind of, yeah. Not in a way where I would kind of pick out the melodies or see how the chords are done. I didn't really do that type of thing. But what I did a lot back in the day was really was comparing waveforms, basically. So I really learned how to read waveforms, and so this helped me a lot to get my kick and snare balances right, and hi-hats and all these drum things that on yeah, because it's all influenced by the low end, and on small speakers you don't really understand what's happening. So waveforms help me a lot in doing that, and also trying to figure out what the balances of other elements that come in during a track. So basically, what the mix levels should be. I think for that, I did a lot of referencing and trying to learn how to read waveforms. Otherwise, yeah, I don't think I ever did like analyze melodies and stuff because I was so used to it from playing piano. Um, so yeah, I think I'm more on the analytical side of like really just going in there and trying to read a waveform and see what that gives me. That helped me a lot.
Yeah, so more on the sort of, I guess, the sonic improvement
Yeah,
side of things.
exactly.
When it comes to the compositional side, obviously you already had the piano ability for your melodies and your harmonies. And what about the arrangement side of things? Did that just come naturally to you because of your prior experience and the jamming, or were there any things that you felt you needed to learn? Particularly talked about Robert and him helping you to understand music for the dance floor. Were there, how did
Mm.
that side of your skill set develop?
Yeah, that was really Robert's influence on that one, trying to kind of nail arrangements for a club. He really helped me with that, and that I think that kind of sparked this fire as well. So I was really like trying to. So what I always had in my previous productions before that point, I had this kind of middle part that was not working. There was always something missing. It felt boring, right? And there was not enough movement. And so Robert really kind of opened my eyes in that aspect, that you don't necessarily need to add things, but you can also take things away in the course of an arrangement. So um, yeah, I think I just discovered so many more ways to make an arrangement work on the dance floor. Um, One thing that was always there in terms of the arrangement structure was really that one moment where everything would climax. So there was always a thing I wanted in my music, but I was definitely struggling with the middle section of a song, and how to keep the energy and how to keep people involved. And just referencing from Robert's tracks back then, that helped me a lot, because he was not doing much in his tracks. He would be adding some more effects, maybe opening the cutoff on a synth, right? And that would be just enough to kind of get people through the middle part and then to that climax that eventually people want. So yeah, he helped me a lot doing that.
I, that's brought something to my mind actually, which may or may not have been a not a concern necessarily, but something that you kept front of mind, is that there's almost a juxtaposition, I guess, between having the ability to write complex melodies and chords and the repetitive nature of dance music. And it's easy to overcomplicate things, and there's a time to bring things in and there's time where there isn't. Was that a part of your development as well, balancing all of the amazing skills you brought to the table with what a piece of music that typically worked when we talk about the dance floor, and the repetitive and sometimes quite simplistic nature of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always had this problem of just really kind of putting too much in a song, and having too many parts, too many complex parts in one part of the arrangement. So yeah, that was always something I struggled with. But I think every time I played in the club, it just got better a little bit, and then of, over the course of a few years, at some point I was like, I think I found my balance, right? This is exactly the level where I have enough complex elements, but also have the simplicity to make it work on the dance floor. So yeah, I think I found it, and right now I feel like my new stuff is actually going back again. It has too much complex elements again, so I think this is a never-ending story. And it's also, I think it also depends a lot on your influences, because I listen to a lot of indie pop and a lot of things apart from the dance music scene. So I feel like all that exposure to that music kind of make me want to make things more complex, which is not necessarily great for dance music, right? But it's definitely there's always this you always have to take a compromise at some point. And with a lot of my new productions, I'm right now removing some of the elements from the original production because it's just too much. So yeah, still ongoing.
Yeah, I love the word compromise. It's so often the case as well. What am I going to let go of that I really like, but for the greater good of the record, so to speak. And you mentioned these other influences that are kind of feeding your muse, so to speak. Is that just purely on a subconscious level, or sometimes do you hear something and that sparks you to get in the studio and say, oh, that was an interesting kind of musical idea, let's say, I'd love to build a track starting off with that? How do the outside influences come into the studio, and how do you typically start your tracks?
Mhm. I don't think I necessarily go in there to find things that I want to kind of, yeah, put to my music or have as a starting point to my music. But what I do kind of try to incorporate is the feeling that I, or the general vibe that I get from certain songs. That's what I listen to most, and that's where really, that's what's stuck in my head. Really, that it's not like a particular melody or a drum groove would kind of be in my head for 5 days, but a feeling of a song that I really like, it sticks with me for weeks, right? So that's kind of where I listen to the most, or what I try to bring to my productions, if at all. And yeah, I mean, to answer your second question, how do I start my tracks? I think this always varies a little bit. Nowadays, I'm doing a lot of hardware jams, just without the computer even being on. I just try to, yeah, have something interesting going as a backbone of a track, something that's not too musical. That's why hardware and modular as well. So I just have this kind of more techy backbone to a song, and then I can add chords in the computer afterwards. Um, but then also sometimes I just start with classic chord progression, bass line, and melody. So I'm still kind of in between the classical way of writing a song and then trying other things. But I do try a lot of other ideas. Also, what gets me going a lot of times is really just checking synth presets and just trying to find this one sound where I'm like, wow, okay, this is something I could do a track with, and then I just yeah, try to have a go at it.
Uh-huh. I love it. And I imagine you get sort of different results as well as it keeping it fresh for you. It might take tracks in slightly different directions. At what point do you feel the structure of the track coming on? So you could be jamming something and not feeling it. Another time you are, and sort of there might be a tipping point where you say, okay, I can, this is unfolding in my mind now to turn this into an
Hmm.
arrangement. How does that typically work, and how many ideas do you write in order to find, in order typically for one to kind of spark that in you?
That's a difficult one. I mean, I know that feeling, and it typically arises after, let's say, you have 3 to 4 core ideas, let's say a chord, a bass line, a melody, and it doesn't even need to be a good groove. That's something I could end up doing in the arrangement. But yeah, I think it's just about a catchy melody idea where you feel like nothing is missing and it's all there. It has all the emotions. Then then that's kind of the point where I had to arrangement mode, not necessarily with this kind of idea in mind of how to arrange it, but just because I know, okay, that's enough. Um, I just moved to arrangement mode, and those few times where I have that feeling of knowing, okay, I need the hi-hat to come in at bar 32, and this main lead has to come exactly there. That's obviously that's the perfect case, but I wouldn't say it happens a lot. Maybe like with every fifth or sixth production, I would say. I wish
So
it was more
how
often.
do you arrange the track then? What's the typical process? You've got the loop, you
Mhm.
go, I'm feeling it, I've got the parts, there's a song here. What if I was sort of sitting next to you, watching you show me how to do it, what would I often see?
I think you would see me doing one thing a lot, and that is trying to make the main part or the climax part of a song work. So that's what I work on in the session view. It's really just the maximum amount of energy and elements that I want, and then I just put that into arrangement mode. Still work on that climax thing for a while and kind of try to add some details and stuff. And then I'm not so sure. Maybe this is an unusual part of my production, but what I do then, especially when I have not that many drums, usually the drums are not set in stone when I do this. So I would really just do this with the melody, bass, leads. If I have that, I kind of would consider that to be the climax in the musical sense, right? So then I move to the arrangement, and then what I do a lot is basically copying everything to the start of the arrangement, and then muting everything I wouldn't like in the beginning, and then I start building my drums there. So imagine my Ableton session has this one thing on the left where I'm building the drums, and then on the far right you have my climax. So that's kind of my approach to then kind of try to connect the two, and also in some projects I also find this middle part again. So I work on a dedicated another 8 bar, 16 bar loop that's supposed to be in the middle. And then I just try to connect the dots really. I don't know why this is the most efficient way of working for me, but it's kind of the way my production works the best for me. And I feel like I probably could spend a lot of time, lot more time on drums in my session view, just to make it instantly better, right? Or more complete. But I do like this workflow of having just the melodies, and then while I'm doing the arrangement, I'm adding drums and kind of seeing which direction I can take the track. It's not necessarily set in stone, so I don't go like in the studio and have this idea of making a track for a dedicated label that needs certain type of drums. Not really doing that.
I love it, and it's got bears some similarities actually to how I teach, because creativity is all about connections. And when we have two different, whether it's two ideas you come into the studio with and merge together, or like you say, you start jamming and then you say, okay, how could I write a piece here, how do I connect those? Oh, there's a middle bit, I'll put that in now, how do I connect those three? It's the way that our brain loves to work, is trying to connect these different things. It makes absolutely perfect sense to me. I love it. And how long does it typically take you to write a track? And I know this will vary, but just in general, if I've got a feel for it, I know some you might sit there and it's magic and it comes out really quickly. Others may be a longer grind. But is there a sort of an amount of time that you would say is typical?
Mm-hmm. To finish a whole production, including all the details, I would say my average would probably be about a week, maybe 2 weeks, 1.5 weeks, I guess, something like this. But obviously you have those other situations where you might end up finishing a track in 4 hours. And I also had the total opposite. I have this one track is called the Sawtooth Orchestra. And that one, I think I've been working on it for like 4.5 to 5 years. So always kept changing things. So yeah, it's a never-ending process. Even when the track is out, I'm still thinking about it, and what I could have done better and stuff like that.
Yeah, if everyone always, right?
Yeah.
In that period of time, let's say whatever, a week and a half, are you sort of completing a part of the track and then leaving a bit of space and coming back listening to it with fresh ears? How does that work, sort of taking time and space away from the piece of music and coming back and listening? And what does that usually inform you of?
Yeah, so I do this a lot, taking steps away from a project, but my workflow in that aspect is also different, because usually I work on like 3 to 4 projects at a time. So I try to finish them all. Let's say I have 4 tracks and I try to finish them in 2 weeks. I just keep jumping between projects, and kind of, trying to work on a project until I feel like I have no input left. I have nothing to add at this point, and then I just move to the next. And that's really kind of, I think this does the same or similar thing, right? Than taking a break from a song for a few days or weeks. It just it also helps me to connect all of the tracks that I'm working on to each other, so they don't sound like they sound like one thing and are connected to each other. So I do like this workflow a lot. But then when I finish the production completely, when I have all the details ready, I still I would listen to the track maybe 2 weeks, 1 week after, without listening to it in the meantime, and then trying to do like a final version. That's what I always do, but the main production process is like done in two weeks. But yeah, I always revisit after a while of really not having to do anything with the project. I just kind of try to take a more distant look and see if I'm now this, if I'm playing it now as a DJ also, what would put me off about this song, or like I don't know, if there was a person that didn't know me as an artist, what would I feel is weird about this song? Yeah, and I think that's something you couldn't answer right in the process of producing something is not possible. You're still so attached. But yeah, a few weeks after, that kind of works, and sometimes it leads me to interesting discoveries. And yeah, I think in a lot of cases that actually help the song become a lot better.
Uh-huh. Now, this is one of the most difficult questions ever, um, but I love to ask it. How do you know when it's finished? At what point? And you know, it's the Da Vinci, I think, wasn't it? Art is never finished, merely abandoned. But even then, at which point do you decide that you won't work on it anymore? Is perhaps a better way to put it, because I know you always listen back, say, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. So at what point do you decide, okay, I've been out and I've sort of DJ'd with it and I've come back in the studio and made changes, and now I'm going to ship it out and it's going to the label or wherever it's going? How do you know when it's ready?
Um, I would agree to that statement actually of art being never really ready. But yeah, I think at some point you do have to make a commitment, right? Like you could send it to a label and still make changes later. It's not like you're really shipping the product. Let's say you're kind of just you're at a point where you're comfortable enough sending it, but still know that something could be changed afterwards. And I do that a lot, basically getting to a point where I'm fine with sending it, and I know that the person receiving it gets what the song is about and can also play it. But then I do reserve the time to, let's say, in the meantime of the artist signing the track or the label signing the track and the thing being released and sent to mastering first, I still reserve the right to kind of change something if I feel like it. But usually at the time where I send it to someone for it as a demo, I'm already kind of finished with the thought process about a certain track. I would revisit most of my tracks after that, but just for very minor fixes and improvements. It's not really that I'm working on creative things once I send something out.
Love it. So what ultimately is happening is you'll, you know, maybe play it out in the clubs, and that will inform you, as you'd said, you know, what might put someone else off if they were hearing it, what sounds weird about it. Once those
Yeah.
things are corrected and it goes to the label, then a really interesting thing has happened, because you are still reserving the right to change it, which gives you kind of psychologically a little buffer. However, now there's a deadline in place where it gets
Yeah.
totally taken out of your hands, which I think is a really cool way of working.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, maybe this is a personal thing about me, but deadlines usually kind of they force me to put more effort into something because I know I can't do it afterwards, or at least I'm gonna get a lot of backlash if I do so. But yeah, I think it's just sometimes it's actually what I need to get motivated to finish something properly and work on all the details and put all these hours in working on automations and stuff. It's kind of like this. Yeah, you have this never-ending thing, which is art or your track, and then at some point somebody's like, "This is your time frame. You need to use it." And so, yeah, that actually helps me a lot when there's a deadline. I usually appreciate that.
I love it. And this sort of brings me on to the next question, which is obviously when you first started writing music and you know, could spend all the time experimenting and you had all the time in the world. Now that you're a professional now and you have gigs and you have, presume, you get remix requests and label deadlines. How do you manage that pressure coming into the studio? You mentioned deadlines can be a good thing for you. Is there anything else you've had to change or adapt about your way of working with some of the external pressures and demands, might be a better word?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to, yeah, to remember to not get crushed by this, because I think there's a lot of opportunity always. Like you can always do certain projects, right? You could do remixes, you could do mixing and teaching like you do. Like there's so much, right? We could do with our skills. But I think the most important thing is that it's also just saying no at some point, and really reserving your creative energy for things that you love and that really inspire you. So for one practical example that I did is I basically stopped taking remix requests at some point. I did a few last year, but since then I didn't do a remix, and it feels great because not saying I didn't feel any of the remixes I did back then. They're good. And the originals were great. That's why I took on the remix. But right now I feel like this being very selective in what you work on for others is a great thing, because you can provide more value to them, and there will be more like creative juice in what you in those selective things you do, right? So that's kind of the approach I'm taking right now, especially regarding remixes, and I think that works great. It takes a lot
Yeah,
of pressure off the table.
I love it. I love the how you put that as well, sort of managing your creative energy. I think that's a really great way to phrase that. So talking about the live shows and that side of things as well, how do you prepare your music to kind of take it out on the road in that respect? And is that something that's in your mind during the creative process as well?
Yeah, I do think about how I prepare stems and tracks while I'm producing it. So the way that you could imagine my preparation to be is really just I have eight, I think eight stems. Yeah, eight stems of kick, drums. I have like three drum stems, then four melody stems, uh, and a bass line stem. So yeah, the kick is always I put it into a drum rack, so it's not really a stem. But yeah, I have those few stems, and I already start thinking about how am I gonna arrange those stems while I'm producing. So that would look like, let's say I have 10 melodies or 10 background things that could be considered melodies. I would have to somehow find a way to put them into four stems or three stems sometimes, that all work together and that I can combine in a suitable way on stage. So let's say what I wouldn't do and what wouldn't be great is to have a very dominant synth melody and maybe let's say chords that just blow up the whole song. I wouldn't have that in one stem, because obviously that's something you want to be able to play with on stage and kind of alternate between the two. So yeah, this is definitely something I consider also doing production. How am I gonna play things eventually? Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
And so then when you've got the hardware consideration, and Robert might not be the best role model for this because you walked into his studio and there's all the hundreds
yeah.
of pieces of equipment, but um, how do you choose if or when you might bring new hardware in, maybe not just for your live performance, but into your studio, because everything carries a a learning curve, and
Mm.
whilst that can be fun, it has a disruption to the creative flow simultaneously. So what's your thought process around bringing, I guess, even new software to some degree into your music production? How do you think about that?
Mm. So yeah, I think what's really important for me is that there is not that big of a learning curve. So I think most of the synths that I own, except my modular here, is kind of very immediate, and it's not like I have to do a lot to make it sound great. Recent addition, actually, this one is the Behringer Monopoly. It's super cheap and simple, but it's very immediate and it's great synth. And I really like those very small, kind of simple synths that you can play really well. So something that I can play with my hands is always a plus. I don't really go for rack synths, and that's also the approach I'm taking when I'm considering this something for my life. It's really just how can I play this, and how does it benefit me with the playing abilities that you have, right? So in this example of the Behringer, it's just like having the mod wheel and the pitch bend and all these controls that are quite simple, but they do a lot, right? So I think that's something I really try to keep the synths like simple but very playable.
Yeah, the word that you use there, I think that's really powerful, at least for me, is immediate, because that ties in the idea of it being intuitive to you, it playing to your skills as someone who likes to jam and improvise. And also, as you mentioned, that it doesn't take a lot of work to make it sound good. And that way you get the benefits of something new and inspiring and some new directions, whilst minimizing the risks of it kind of interrupting
Mm.
your creative flow and the way that you work, which sounds great. So one of the things, sort of just to start wrapping up the interview, that I'm curious about is you started at such a young age, and you kind of, I guess, were taken along with the way things were working, and then a career starts to appear. Do you have sort of goals and a plan in mind as to where you want to go and what you want to achieve? Do you kind of map things out?
I started to, yeah. I think over the past 4 years, since this has become my main job, even if I don't like calling it that, this is really
Love that.
the point where you have to consider this as a long-term play, right? You can't just go and release music every 4 months and thinking it's going to be all right. Maybe it will be, but I feel like at a certain point you really have to have a vision and something that you stand for as well. So I do think that this has changed a lot because I used to not really care. I was just trying things out and experimenting, but I feel like now that I've been through this phase and I've done my fair share of experiments, I will still continue to do them. It's right now I'm more at this point like I'm trying to nail down what do I want to stand for and what do I want to sound like in the future, and that definitely incorporates a long-term multi-year plan. Not in a sense of we're like a business plan, but obviously you're kind of making those checkpoints for yourself, like do you want to be in 1 year and 2 years, and what's going to happen in 5 years.
Yeah.
So
Is
yeah,
there a real unfulfilled ambition, like playing somewhere or doing something that you'd be happy to share?
something that I already accomplished or
Or it can be, and
something.
something that's coming up. Yeah, I think that'd be
Okay,
great. Something you've
okay,
accomplished
let's
and
try
something
with
on your
something.
bucket list.
Let's try with something on my bucket list because I think not really thinking about the past so much.
Okay,
Okay,
awesome.
so my bucket list. Probably. Wow, there's so many things. My bucket list definitely includes writing some type of ambient electronica, maybe pop-ish album. Um, in some released in some obscure way. I don't want it to be on Spotify, and yeah, haven't really thought about that, but I do want to make something more out there in terms of an album. So that's really one of my goals, and I would like to say I'm working on it, but I always just keep doing random sketches and never following up on them. So it's gonna take a while probably.
No, but it sounds
But yeah,
like you've got stuff on the hard drive that's, you know, going to
yeah.
be inspirational and maybe starting points for records as a result of it. I love that. And I won't dig into the obscure way because I love mystery. And it's one of the things that I think that we've lost a lot over the years. So when I first got into music and there wasn't, you know, all of the social media and things, a lot of artists had a real mystery about them. We didn't know a huge amount. We didn't know what they were doing and what's happening and what they were really like. So when you say something like release it in an obscure way, I don't want to dig. I don't want to push on it. I want to leave the mystery and let us wonder, you know, what's Tim planning, what might come out in the future. So that was sort of me looking backwards a little bit there. The last sort of big question of the interview, which is always the sort of the big one, is if you had one piece of advice to people starting out in music production now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think that this kind of like two things in one, but I would say be prepared to spend a lot of time learning and don't be scared to do that. And also don't be discouraged if it doesn't sound like you want it to sound at the beginning. I think that's perfectly normal. It took me 5 years to get to that point. Um, and just really kind of keep pushing, keep learning, and then at some point you'll be able to find your own voice and your own style. I see this with a lot of people that I follow. After a certain time, it's just there and it clicks. And I think everyone can get to that point if they're just willing to push and learn for probably a longer time.
Yeah, and I really like the bit about don't be discouraged. I think that's really, really important. And even, you know, someone at your level now creating the music that you write, I'm sure there are times when you write stuff and you're like, oh my God, that's
Absolutely.
and you have to push on a little bit through certain periods as well. Oh, wow. What an amazing interview. I've absolutely loved this. So what can we expect coming up from you, sort of shows and releases and things that you've got in the pipeline now?
Yeah, so the most important thing for me this year is launching scenarios with Maga and Sean Duron and some other friends. We're doing this kind of new label collective, and we just launched with the first release. That's called Here to Stay. And we're going to do a lot more this year. There's going to be, I think, like 4 to 5 EPs coming over the course of the year. I'm not going to be on every, I'm not involved on every EP, but I'm always playing a part in the curation at least. So everything you'll hear on Scenarios is kind of has been touched by me in some way.
Awesome.
And yeah, a few other things. I have a few solo EPs coming on Poker Flat. There's one coming in this summer. Another EP is coming on Steel for Talent, actually next month. And then I also have a collaboration EP coming with Coach, which is quite nice. And I've been a fan of his for a long time. So yeah, super stoked about that one as well.
Amazing stuff. And shows?
Yeah, shows. We're just working on it. I'm not so sure if you noticed, but I was kind of, I was not shying away, but I was really refraining from playing a lot of shows during COVID, and I'm just trying to pick it up a bit. So at the moment, we are working on US shows again, a lot of global tours that are being planned right now, and I'm really stoked about it. There's going to be Australia, India, US,
Awesome.
even South America. So there's a lot of things in the pipeline, and I'm super excited, but I'm honestly quite nervous because I haven't played these long tours for a
You'll
while.
pick it up where you left off, like riding a bike. I mean, it's cool you're mentioning the US because my wife and I, in just a few weeks' time now, actually leaving London to move to Austin. So maybe
Oh, wow,
you'll be
nice.
playing in the vicinity, and she's South American from Brazil, so we might actually overlap in a different country at some point, which would be absolutely amazing.
Yeah,
And
that would be great.
look, this has been an absolute blast. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you, and listening to your journey, which is quite unique. There's not too many people at the age that you started, and the trajectory you followed, but also your insights, and how articulate you've been with the journey. It's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for jumping on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great sharing my thoughts with you. Really
Legend.
appreciate
Thanks, Tim. Bye bye.
it. Bye.